Welcome to Hope is Here. My name is Greg Horn. We're continuing our series, Who is This Man? And this week, we're looking at the man who changed death forever. And of course, we're talking about Jesus. And yesterday, we looked at how Jesus changed death forever we looked at a couple things. One, how Jesus enters into real grief with us. And we're looking at that story of Lazarus in John chapter 11. And we talked about how faith means trusting God even when it doesn't make any sense. And then we wrapped up yesterday's program about looking at how God's heart for our pain, that God understands and has a heart for our pain. And we talked about that famous Bible verse, the shortest Bible verse in the Bible, John chapter 11, verse 35, that Jesus wept. And talking about how grief causes us to shed tears and how God gave us tears to release the pain, and that grief is the cost of love. And if you missed yesterday's program, really would encourage you to go to our website, hopeisheretoday.org. That's hopeisheretoday.org. You can find all our programs. We've been blessed to record over 1,000 programs here at Hope is Here. And I also want to remind you that we're on all the major platforms, Spotify, iTunes, Podbean. And that we also have a YouTube channel, and hope you'll subscribe to whichever platform you are on and share programs, make a comment if you've been blessed by a program, because it encourages me and our Hope is Here team and our financial ministry partners. And in fact, you've been blessed by this ministry. Man, we'd be honored and so appreciative if you go to our website, hopeisheretoday.org, and make a donation. You can do it safe and secure online at hopeisheretoday.org. Or if you like to mail a check, we have several people that do checks. Man, that's great. We get all of those donations. We don't have to pay the transaction fee of, I think it's 3%. So the mailing address is on there. Just make the check out to Hope is Here Ministry. All donations, whether they're online or if they're checks, are tax deductible, and man, they're all greatly appreciated. But yesterday's program, we wrapped up looking about how Jesus understands our pain, feels our pain. Jesus wept over the death of his friend Lazarus. And, you know, I was starting to share that, you know, my dad, it's been 10 years ago, back on March 18th, since he went to heaven. And I can't believe it. It's been 10 years. Sometimes it seems like yesterday. Other times it seems like a lifetime ago. But I can honestly say that, you know, if I hadn't written it in my journal, my devotional book that I was doing, I might not have totally remembered the exact day. I knew it was in this season, you know, in mid-March and somewhere in that range. And embarrassed to say, sometimes I don't even remember the exact day. I think it's the 16th, and I'm like, no, it's actually the 18th. And yet the reason I say that and not be embarrassed is because God's done a lot of healing. I mean, I greatly miss my dad those first few years, and I used to go up and preach with a Bible with his name on it. It was actually his Bible. So, and because I was carrying him with me. And then one day I just felt like the Lord said, you know, I'm your heavenly Father, and I've got you now. Your earthly father's with me, and why don't you lean into me more than you do him? And you need to let him go. And man, he was gentle about it, and I didn't like hearing that at first, because actually a Christian counselor that I worked with had kind of planted that seed with me and said, you know, I don't think you've really released your dad, and you're still kind of trying to lean into him too much, your earthly father, instead of your heavenly father, even though he's been gone for like 3 years. And I didn't like it at the time, but as I processed it and prayed about it, I realized that was truth and love I was heard. And I went to the gravesite, and I had an honest conversation with my dad. And, you know, there were some couple of things that I kind of held on to that had been painful early on in my childhood. And, you know, my dad did actually ask for forgiveness, but I probably hadn't forgiven him. And he and I just had an honest conversation. When I say conversation, it was me talking, obviously. And I know he wasn't there, but it was very therapeutic. And maybe you need to do that. You can go to the cemetery. I know a lot of people now get, you know, cremated, so they're you know, not at a cemetery, a gravestone. And we know if you're followers of Jesus that, you know, yeah, the body's there, but they're not there. They're spirits in heaven, and one day you'll see them again. But it was very therapeutic for me. But there's also a way that you can do that and do called the empty chair, where you can sit down in a chair and have an empty chair across from you and just have a conversation with somebody who's already gone, and just share your heart, any hurts, pain, and disappointment, maybe even anger. And friends, it's very therapeutic, and I would encourage you to do that. And that's the way you can process grief. Sometimes it's love, but sometimes it could be anger. It could be subdued anger that you have just kind of hidden, suppressed is the word I'm looking for. So, but I can tell you now, beyond a shadow of doubt, 10 years later now, that I'm at total peace. I'm blessed. I had my dad for 50 years when he died, and man, what a blessing it was. I think it was actually a little, it was right at 50 years old when that happened, and he died, and I'm just so thankful for that. And man, thankful he was a follower of Jesus the last 24 years of his life. But with Jesus weeping over Lazarus, I'm glad the story didn't end with tears, though. As we continue looking in John chapter 11, the third thing we can learn about Jesus and death, Jesus makes a pretty staggering claim, okay? Earlier in that conversation, John 11, we go back up to verse 25. Jesus tells Martha something astonishing. He says, I am the resurrection and I'm the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die. Notice what Jesus doesn't say. He does not say, I can bring resurrection. Jesus doesn't say, I understand resurrection. Jesus says, I am the resurrection. Say that with me, friends. I am the resurrection. One more time. I am the resurrection. Jesus, the great I am. Friends, I want to remind you, it's hard to believe, but, Easter's gone, done in the past recently, and yet we've already looked in the rearview mirror and just forgot all about the most powerful thing in the history of mankind. Remind you, resurrection was not merely an event, it was a person, and his name is Jesus. Friends, that's why Christianity is different from every other philosophy and religion. Jesus did not come merely to teach us how to live better lives. He came to conquer the one enemy no human could defeat, and that is death, friends. The writer of Hebrews explains it this way in Hebrews chapter 2, verses 14 and 15. Because God's children are human beings made of flesh and blood, the Son also became flesh and blood. For only as a human being could he die, and only by dying could he break the power of the devil, who had the power of death. Only in this way could Jesus set free all who have lived their lives as slaves to the fear of dying. Did you hear that phrase? Slaves to the fear of dying. Friends, unfortunately, I think if we're honest, much of our human life is shaped by fear. I'm embarrassed to tell you that I have let the enemy steal way too many moments in my life, too many minutes, hours, days of my life by fear. Some of the things we fear are fear of losing control, fear of losing time. We fear losing people that we love. But friends, I've got great news today. Jesus came to break that fear. Theologian N.T. Wright says, the resurrection completes the inauguration of God's kingdom. It's the decisive event demonstrating that God's new world has begun. Before Jesus would prove it on that Easter morning, he gave us a little preview when Jesus proved his authority over death. Go on down in John chapter 11, verse 43. Jesus said, take away the stone. But Lord, said Martha, the sister of the dead man Lazarus, by this time there's a bad odor, for he's been dead for 4 days. Remember, we talked about that on Monday's program, the significance of the 4 days. If you didn't catch that program, go check it out on our website, hopeisheretoday.org, or wherever you listen to podcasts or our YouTube channel. Then Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. When he had said this, Jesus called out in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, take off the grave clothes and let him go. Oh, friends, what a powerful moment. Can you imagine that? Seeing somebody's been dead for 4 days walk out of a tomb. But, when Jesus said that, Martha hesitated. I love that, told him to come out. And, he said, hey, Martha's like, hey, Jesus, I want to remind you, he's been dead 4 days. And there might be an odor, and I was reading the New Living Translation, but I love the King James Version. She said, Lord, he stinketh. Oh my goodness. I just had somebody that became a Christian recently said, hey, I got a King James Version Bible just because, I think that it's the best selling of all time, but I can't understand it. So can you recommend another version? So talk to them about the NIV or the NLT. But it was just funny. The King James Version said, Martha said, Lord, he stinketh. But what she's trying to say basically, though, okay, on top of the odor, is that, Jesus, it's basically too late. But Jesus still looks at the tomb and shouts, Lazarus, come out. And, man, that's what Jesus does, friends. Sometimes he does things that our minds cannot understand. I mean, Lazarus was still wrapped in burial clothes, but he became alive. Someone once joked, if Jesus hadn't specifically called Lazarus by name, every grave in the cemetery could have emptied. But friends, this miracle was not the final victory over death. It was just a preview trailer, because soon Jesus was going to walk into a tomb and walk out never to die again. Randy Alcorn, in his awesome book on heaven, says, the resurrection of Jesus is the hinge of history. Without it, death wins. With it, death loses. Lazarus walked out of the tomb, and there was a sign pointing forward to Easter morning. Friends, here's the deal. Resurrection changes how we live now. Paul described it this way in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 20 through 22, when he said, but in fact, Christ has been raised from the dead. He is the first of a great harvest of all who have died. So you see, just as death came into the world through a man, now the resurrection from the dead has begun through another man. Just as everyone dies because we all belong to Adam, everyone who belongs to Christ will be given new life. Friends, because Jesus conquered death, fear lost its grip, hope has substance, and eternity reshapes it today, friends. In the ancient world, cemeteries were called necropolis, meaning cities of the dead. But early Christians began using a different word. They called burial places cemeteries, from a Greek word meaning sleeping place. Why? Because they believed death was temporary after Jesus did that with Lazarus, right? Like sleep before morning, when we go to bed at night, get up in the morning. C.S. Lewis captured it beautifully when he said, if I find in myself desires which nothing in this world can satisfy, the most probable exclamation is that I was made for another world. Friends, resurrection doesn't just change how we die, it changes how we live. Here's 3 things that I know that how it helps change us how we live with resurrection now. 1, we live more boldly. 2, we can forgive more freely. Pastor Greg said that forgive word again. Number 3, we serve more sacrificially. But I'm so thankful, friends, that this life is not the end of the story. But Jesus never promised us, as his followers, a pain-free life. But he did promise something better, friends, a death-defeating future. The story of Lazarus reminds us of 3 powerful truths, friends. 1, death is real. 2, grief is honest. And 3, hope is greater. The same man who stood outside a tomb and wept is the same man who later walked out of his own tomb alive. And because he did, death is no longer the end, it's the doorway to resurrection. I close with 2 questions today for each of us. Number 1, what fear is the resurrection asking you to release to Jesus today? And secondly, what grief is Jesus stepping into you, with you in this season of life? One more time. What fear is the resurrection asking you to release to Jesus today? And number 2, what grief is Jesus stepping into with you in this season of life? I hope you'll spend some time answering those 2 questions. My name's Greg Horn, and this is Hope is Here.